Morning.
Morning.
Morning, everybody.
Morning.
So we don't have, Judith is out having lunch, so she already told me, but I wanted to see how many people we had from different places already. So we have different parts of the country. So everybody looks like they're sheltering nicely. But we don't have Jeff on yet from Colorado. I want to get weather updates, you know, pre-holiday. Diane, what's it like up there?
Oh, I just took a walk. It's beautiful out. I did need a jacket. We had rain yesterday, a little bit of rain. I couldn't believe it. So.
Where are you, Diane?
What, dear?
Where are you?
I'm in San Jose.
Oh, nice.
Only because my son is here. I would move back to Santa Clarita in a minute. If I could.
And we would take you.
Well, you have a spare room?
Sure do. Come on down.
We have, who else do we have here? We have Rosemary
We're in the East Valley, Rabbi.
Rosemary and Schwartz's from the east to the west of our region. And then let's see. We don't.
Judith is in Washington, D.C.
Yeah, but Judith is not on right now. She's actually told me she's going to be having lunch, so she's not going to be on today. Rosemary is going to read for us today. Rosemary's back. Rosemary's back.
Yes.
Right, Rosemary?
Right.
You
So
look good, Rosemary.
Rosemary's
Thank
going to
you.
do it.
Looking very good.
And but I'm seeing that I was waiting to see if Jeff was going to come on from Colorado, and there might have been a few other people that were coming on from out of
And
state.
we're having class tomorrow night, Rabbi?
Yeah, we're sometimes we don't on the Wednesday before Thanksgiving, but I don't see a reason why not. I mean, some people are going to be traveling, but I wonder what it'll be like tomorrow. You know, I wonder if obviously a lot less people are taking planes, but I wonder if the roads are going to be crowded with people. You know, I don't
Well, I know they showed pictures of airports this morning and they're packed.
Are they?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, a lot of people flying.
Wow. I thought they really had cut down a lot on the.
No, you wait 2 weeks and see what the COVID numbers are going to be.
Well, I think that's why they're saying that these things are going to be in effect. These latest restrictions are going to be in effect for 3 weeks, because I think they're hoping that they'll be able to.
We won't be spending as much time cooking.
No, that's true.
Oh, hello.
Oh, it's a puppy. Somebody relented.
Well, yeah, but you haven't seen the dog
Oh,
yet.
little.
No.
No,
Oh, he's
What's his
getting
name?
big, Tracy.
Yeah, he just got groomed yesterday.
it's Ryder. We inherited the name.
Ryder.
We didn't want to change. That was his name, his birth name. So
What is he?
talking about Moses and his birth name. It's a
The mini golden doodle.
We have a big golden dude.
no, it's nice. It's a beautiful dog, but it's pees everywhere,
It doesn't pee everywhere.
every day, every
It's
single
like
day.
once a day it has an accident.
It's not an accident if it happens. If it happens once a day, it's not an accident. It's a thing.
Right.
Pees
It's a
on the
plan.
ground. It's a pee.
You need a crate and a bell.
We have a crate.
Rosemary,
put a
we have
bell
both
on
of
it.
those.
We have a bell.
Okay.
First of all, he's figured out how to escape out of his
He
crate.
also has learned how to.
Then you need a clip. My dog can escape from his crate too.
So I did last night. I put a rubber band around it. It was all good. But the problem with us is we're not crating him properly. Clearly, when you crate train, it sounds a little bit like a torture thing. But we
It does.
No,
probably
it shouldn't be like torture.
Really.
No, my dog, as soon as I say kennel up and pick up the treat he's going to get when he gets in the crate, he's there. And he'll sleep in there when it's open. He does not.
Oh, I know, but I'm talking about what happened to get him into the crate. I'm not talking about how he does it today. I'm talking about the few weeks of torture that
He sleeps all night in the crate.
he does, Tracy, but he's not in the crate when he's not out. We've discussed this already. We're not. We've been reprimanded by trainers for not
Yes.
being as aggressive in our training methods. But
Yes.
but
We have the same kind of arguments at our house over who's spoiling the dog.
yeah, yeah.
Well, our dog, allows us to sleep in his bed.
Yep, that's our story. But we have, yes, I relented, and I can't say that this is all because, honestly, it's all because of COVID, because our daughter was like everybody else.
Oh yeah, blame the little one.
Oh, no, this is 100% for her, but I blame COVID. I don't blame, the reason I finally relented was because of COVID, because it's just so
You have to
hard.
blame China.
Blame China for my dog.
Right.
That's ironic.
Oh, Jeff's on, by the way, Rabbi.
That's ironic. I know, Jeff, what's the weather like there now?
You're on mute, Jeff.
Muted.
Still on
What's
mute.
our weather report from Denver?
Can you read lips?
He can't figure it out.
You're on mute.
There you go.
We had 3 inches. That's my dog. 3 inches of snow.
3 inches of snow already?
Yeah. So did our walkway and our driver, our neighbors. And right now we're in the
3
backyard for
feet
the
or
dog.
3 inches.
Yeah. But it wasn't a wet snow, so it's no big deal.
Snow is snow, Jeff. I don't care what you
Oh,
say.
I know, but while I'm here, I have to say
There
that
you-
and feel like no big deal. But
There you go.
Yeah.
read the LA Times every morning, so I'm still back at home. I got my Dodger shirt on.
There you go.
We miss you. Well, we don't really miss you because we see you about as much as we would have otherwise. So we miss
That's
you
right.
as much as we miss everybody. But yeah, we hope everybody stays healthy and safe and lets this
Rabbi,
period
have you
pass.
thought about, in a few months, when the vaccine's out and we're able to be together again, are you going to still stream it?
Yeah, for sure.
Classes?
For sure.
Yay.
That's without a question. The
So we're going
issue
to have
is-
classes in the synagogue then, right?
Yeah, but the issue is how do we, schedule, how do we choreograph the setup so that,
Right.
people feel like, so we'll see. I mean, that is a little tricky, but hopefully, I mean, we're hoping that the people who are not present, that are virtual, that those people will feel a part of it, as much as possible. So we have to figure out how, like a lot of places, we're going to figure out how to do that. So, that's what we're working on.
This is the highlight of my week.
Oh, thank you. It's the highlight of my week.
I'm
Gotta
telling
tell
you,
you.
I look forward to it. I even just emailed, the rabbi that doesn't do Torah that I have up here. I said, please, can you do it? Shabbat, you have your largest congregation online. Can you do it? Devar Torah on Shabbat. I hope he doesn't kick me out, but I don't understand why they don't do it.
It's okay, Diane. We look forward to seeing you every week too.
That's right.
So with that, we started talking about Moses last week's kind of his, what we have in the Torah is, as we've said, is so minimal. It's led people to think that there's some kind of massive conspiracy to cover up the truth. And this has been going on for thousands of years. This idea that somehow there's a reason, a concerted effort to kind of hide Moses's identity, or what really happened, what really is the real story of Moses. And of course, there's writers who've written a lot about this in the modern era. Freud was probably the most important, and he was not a biblical scholar by any means, but he was fascinated by who Moses really might have been. And and because there's so little information, people are just fascinated by it. They realize that there is something very strange by the lack of information about Moses, because again, in every other culture, we have myth about the background of the person, and so everywhere there's a gap, it kind of just asks for people to step in. The rabbis did, obviously. We're reading Midrash. We read the last 3 weeks Midrash on Moses before he's even born. And now we're starting to get into his birth and some of the legends that the rabbis wrote. It's interesting to kind of compare those to some of the things that we have from the ancient world, but we have texts from the ancient world that basically, I would say, smear Moses based on the lack of information that we have. And one of the ways we know about it is through Josephus and Philo, who were both writers in the ancient Jewish world. Philo lived in Alexandria in Egypt in about the first century BCE, and then Josephus, who lives in Israel, and then later Rome in the first century of the Common Era. So they lived about 100 and something years apart, but they both wrote for Jewish audiences in the Greco-Roman world, and also for Gentiles. And so they were real important because the church kept both of their writings. Jews knew about Philo and knew about Josephus, but didn't really refer back to him a lot. And so some of these writers that wrote about Moses in a negative way, we don't have their works, but we have Josephus and Philo talking about them. It's very similar to what we have in the Christian church, where there's a lot of things we don't know about early Christian heresies, as they're called, or early Christian history, or what other people said about Christianity. We only have the responses of what the church fathers wrote about them. And so we have to kind of like fill in the blanks and try to figure out what really was happening, and what, we only hear the negative, obviously, but we also hear it out of context. The same is true with some of the stuff that was written about Moses. And part of it was because when you write about a religion in the ancient world, and even today, obviously the modern world, you talk about the leader of the religion. You don't just talk about the followers. You kind of talk about the leader, and oftentimes in a negative way, to kind of besmirch and attack the whole operation, right? So, you dig up the dirt and you go after the leader, and that allows you to kind of attack the whole entity. You don't have to attack every one of the followers if you attack the creator or the progenitor of the faith. And that's what happened. That's what happens with Moses in the ancient world. So I just want to show you a little bit about it, because the Midrash in some cases seems to be responding to that, and also kind of responding to the fact that Jews wanted to know. Why don't we know about Moses? Why is this man such a mystery for us, when we should know everything about Moses? He's not really arguably, he's the most important Jew in history. And why do we know so little about him, especially his early days? We don't really learn much about his personal life, even after we spend time with him in the wilderness, or we spend time with him in Egypt. We don't learn about his family. We learn 2 lines about his kids, and so we don't really know about him even post early days. But so here's this is from a piece called Philo's Portrait. This is Louis Feldman, a great professor of Jewish history. He has a work here about how Philo portrayed Moses. And again, Philo lived in Egypt. So there was a huge Jewish community in Alexandria. It was actually the largest Jewish community in the ancient world. So as much as there was a huge Jewish community in Jerusalem and Israel, in what we call Judea in the time of the Romans, the largest city of Jews in the world was Alexandria. Very much like New York is the largest Jewish city in the world. even though there's Jerusalem and Tel Aviv, there are more Jews in the area of New York than any other place in the world. And that's what Alexandria was like. So Philo lived in that Jewish community at the height of its greatness, and he wrote about Moses. And he also, I mean, some of this context here, we're not going to go through obviously this whole piece, but one of the things that Philo talks about is the fact that everybody knew Moses, and whether everyone really knew Moses in the ancient world is hard to we don't really know whether he's overstating that, but he says it, and it seems like people in Egypt knew about it, and people in Greece or in the Greco-Roman world and Greek colonies and Greek areas like Egypt at the time. Remember, Egypt was a Greek colony after Alexander the Great. It was like being in Greece. He says that they knew Moses, and so he talks about Moses in a way that is, Philo talks about Moses as if everyone should know him, and that he was, the greatest person really who ever lived. So the part here I want to so this article talks about how Moses is written about in other Greco-Roman Hellenistic texts, and one of the other texts that we have is this one called Appian, who we don't have the Appian text, but Josephus wrote about it, and he actually wrote a text called Against Appian. It was one of Josephus's texts that we still have. He wrote a couple things, Josephus, but one of them is called Contra Appionem, Against Appian, and he talks about how this Greek Egyptian writer wrote about Moses. And so so I just want to direct you to one part. This is from, anytime you see AP, that's Appian, Contra Appionem, that's the Against Appian. It goes, according to Josephus, the first century, Apollonius Molon and Lysimachus maligned Moses as a charlatan and impostor, partly from ignorance, though mainly from ill will. Rather, says Josephus, Moses is comparable to the Cretan lawgiver Minos and to later legislators who attributed their laws to a god, whether Zeus or Apollo, either being convinced themselves of this fact or hoping to facilitate the acceptance of laws. But as to who is the most successful legislator, this can be answered by comparing the laws themselves with those of others. And so the argument that these Jewish writers had, like Philo and Josephus, was that if you want to know why Moses was so special, look at the law. Look at the laws the laws speak themselves. So all of this gets to the point that, but we don't know about who Moses is. We can't really talk about how great Moses is, other than he talked to God, and we know he talks to God and from the Bible, etc. But why don't we know who he is? And so all of those things, because he doesn't really have this hero backstory, we got to write it. And the rabbis wrote it, and they might have written it at least partly, not just to answer questions about why what really happened, but also because the Midrash writers who were writing in the Greco-Roman period had the same agenda, which is, let's make sure everyone knows how great Moses was, not just the laws, because they all knew it, they all believed it, but let's make sure everyone knows how good Moses is and how great he was and how magical he was and how superhuman he was even. So keep that in mind when we look at Moses, Moses Midrash. We're also looking at against the backdrop of people saying, what is, who is this guy? What's his story? So keep that in mind as we're reading today, the backdrop of what they were writing about, the Midrash writers, not what you and I might want to know, which we might want to know stuff, but we live in a world where the majority of people are Christian. They like Moses. The majority of Muslims really like Moses. Nobody really doesn't like Moses, but there were people who didn't like Moses in the ancient world. So just remember that. There were people who thought he was an imposter or charlatan, or again, a guy who was an Egyptian who maybe was like a ruler who couldn't get his own rule going in Egypt and decided to take people and go somewhere else. Because if you read the story, in our story, there is this question of like, is Moses a ruler who just couldn't rule in Egypt? And you'll see it in the Midrash. I promise you, you're going to see the same themes, but going in obviously in different directions. So I'll keep all of that in mind. That's the backdrop that this stuff was written against. All right, so Rosemary, we're going to start here. What we finished with was Moses, according to the Midrash, had a Hebrew name. Actually didn't have a Hebrew name, had 7 Hebrew names. So when people talk about what was Moses's real name, he had one. We just aren't quite sure of what it is, which also, by the way, shows you how little we know about Moses. Because remember, we have Esther has another name, right? It's Hadassah. We know her Hebrew name. We even get that Jacob has another name, Israel. Having another name isn't a warning, isn't a red flag for, oh, who is this person? So that shouldn't be the problem. The problem is that we don't even have a consensus on what his real name was. And so the last thing we read was everybody had a kind of a different name for him based on who he was. His mom, his dad, his family, his sisters, they all had different names for him. So, so here we are. Moses, as a young boy, he's been given to his mother to nurse. We read, because God forbid an Egyptian woman's breast should touch his mouth. That was in the Midrash last week. And it's not so much just that he should touch a heathen nipple, it's that that woman would say, I nursed Moses. Moses, the great lawgiver of the Jewish people, was suckling at my breast, you know, so that was part of the reason too. So of course he goes back to his mom, his real mom, Yocheved. All right, so let's start here. His kindred.
His kindred and all Israel knew that the child was destined for great things, for he was barely 4 months old when he began to prophesy, saying, in days to come, I shall receive the Torah from the flaming torch.
Okay, so even at 4 months old, he was a prophet. Oh, by the way, we got cut off last week at the end of the thing. I don't know if you heard my point, which was growing up, knowing that I was always fascinated by this issue of what was Moses's real name. Because again, the name we have is very Egyptian, Moses. And the Torah tells us that, you know, the Pharaoh's daughter gives him the name. I was fascinated by this because, again, it's my Hebrew name. And so to have the name Moshe, for me, was always intriguing because to some extent, I knew that it was a Hebrew name, obviously, but it's not really a Hebrew name. And so I was always fascinated by that. I was like, where's my name really come from? I know it comes from Moses. And by the way, that's for me, it was always a huge legacy to think about that name, Moshe. It really was. I mean, if you want to talk about why I do what I do, it might be a little bit because my mom decided to give me that name. And by the way, she didn't just give me that name. Her Hebrew name, my mother, Jackie, was Yocheved. So I had a little bit of there was a little problem there, which was when my mom would tell me the story of Moses, she would tell me, and my name is Yocheved. So kind of messed with me maybe a little bit. I don't know. There could have been a little bit, you know, we're gonna roll this story out again in the 20th century. But yeah, it was pretty wild that was, and she didn't name me Moses because her name was Yocheved. I was named after my grandfather's brother who died very young. And so I had this wonderful name after his Hebrew name. And thankfully, his name in English was Mel. And so they gave me the name Mark, which I really appreciate instead of Mel. Otherwise, I would have been a Mel. That name's never come back, by the way. Mel has not come back. Max has come back. Sam has come back. Mel has not come back. So thankfully, my parents knew enough to keep the M, but lose the Mel. Anyways, sorry. And we have no Mels on the line, so I'm not. Anyways, so let's read about what Yocheved did, what this wonderful lady did.
When Yocheved took the child to the palace at the end of 2 years, Pharaoh's daughter called him Moses because she had drawn him out of the water and because he would draw the children of Israel out of the land of Egypt in a day to come. And this was the only name whereby God called the son of Amram, the name conferred upon him by Pharaoh's daughter. He said to the princess, Moses was not your child, yet you did treat him as such. For this I will call you my daughter, though you are not my daughter. And therefore the princess, the daughter of Pharaoh, bears the name Bethia, the daughter of God. She married Caleb later on, and he was a suitable husband for her. As she stood up against her father's wicked counsels, so Caleb stood up against the counsel of his fellow messengers sent to spy out the land of Canaan. For rescuing Moses and for her other pious deeds, she was permitted to enter paradise alive.
Wow. Pharaoh's daughter. A little bit, that's not the last we'll hear from her, but that's the big part of her story. How she became Bithia. That's the name we know her by, Bithia. It's the Greek version of Bat-Yah, right? The daughter of God, the daughter. So her name gets changed.
Does that make Caleb Moses' stepfather?
Kind of weird, right? Because it's not exactly what you'd. Well, first of all, it's not the only person that Caleb might have been married to. It's a weird thing because Caleb, we would assume, is kind of close in age to Moses, just based on kind of the generation, right? Because he's one of the only, well, Caleb and Joshua are the only two spies who get to go into the promised land. Now, Caleb is like, the reason why it's Caleb and not Joshua is because Joshua clearly is younger than Moses. I guess that would have been a little too weird. But there's only two people of that generation, Caleb and Joshua, besides Moses, who are good people. Like everybody else is kind of messes up, right? They're not allowed to come in. So the rabbis trying to figure out who would have been a suitable mate for this wonderful woman, they really only can go to Caleb or Joshua. Everybody else is going to fall short. And so they love the fact that this woman was so righteous that she gets renamed by God. She gets to go to heaven without dying. Like she doesn't have to, that doesn't happen to anybody. Like the patriarchs, Abraham, Moses, it's so rare. So this woman is kind of given she's given like the ultimate regard. And it's a beautiful way that they put it. Because you adopted this child, I adopt you. It's pretty wild. I mean, it's a pretty wild. It's really special. It really, I would say that it's kind of the ultimate testament to an adoptive parent, right? It shows you how special what somebody does when somebody does that, how special they are when they take on a child. It's kind of like a free ticket to heaven. It's an ultimate ticket to heaven, right? You adopt a child, you take on one of my children, and I take you on. And it is like the ultimate thing a person can do is adopt somebody. And so that's that's what you could say. So Caleb is like one of the only guys who can meet her. There is another there's another midrash that Caleb was Miriam's husband, which kind of makes a little bit more sense, and that they're in the same kind of generation. Because again, we don't know who Miriam's husband is, and the assumption here is that Miriam would have had to be married to somebody very worthy, and so maybe Caleb was married to her. So you will see midrash that's where Caleb goes, but Caleb kind of flows around as the ultimate bachelor, right? Well, he's not a bachelor, we assume, but the ultimate married. He would have been the ultimate. He would have been the ultimate husband, because besides Joshua, nobody else cuts it of that generation. So keep in mind, that's why you have that midrash that it's Caleb. Any other points or we don't know Pharaoh's daughter, which is why she can be called Bithia. The Torah says, "I will make of you a house," and because of this, and this later on where we have that line, the actress Nina Falk played her in the Dutch actress played her in the Ten Commandments. Very classic, very classy European woman who actually only died about 10 years ago. She lived a very long life, just like her namesake, Bithia. But he calls her Bithia in the movie. They go with the Bithia, and she's with them at the end when they're about to leave Egypt. We really don't know much about her, but the rabbis treat her with the ultimate honors that you could get. Permitted to enter paradise alive, no pain at death. All right, here we go.
That Moses might receive the treatment at court usually accorded to a prince, Bithia pretended that she was with child for some time before she had him fetched away from his parents' house. His royal foster mother caressed and kissed him constantly. On account of his extraordinary beauty, she would not permit him ever to quit the palace. Whoever set eyes on him could not leave off from looking at him. Wherefore Bithia feared to allow him out of her sight.
Okay, so
that's a little odd, isn't it? I mean, if she didn't have a husband.
It's very weird, right? Because she pretends that she is pregnant, which is why how she's able to kind of get away with this, which also kind of explains why Moses is born premature, not just for his mother to hide him, but for her to hide that, she just had a baby.
Yet Bithia does not bring him to the court for 2 years. How is that explained?
Well, it can explain how she got pregnant and there's no husband, right? Well, it doesn't really, because how could an Egyptian princess just get pregnant? But this is
well, of course, the ancient world is full of stories about princesses who got pregnant when they weren't supposed to.
It's also a problem, and the Jews knew this, because they did know that the pharaohs married their sisters. Mm-hmm. So they knew this. And so this is part of the problem. Is she already married when this whole scene goes down? There's differences in the midrash. There's some midrashim that have her married, and there's some that don't. Or again, is she married to the person who's going to be the next pharaoh, which means that she's the princess about to be queen. So keep that in mind. That was one of the ways the Egyptians kept the royalty all in one family, and of course also led to what we now know, some pretty horrible congenital birth issues. I mean, think we found those in King Tut and some of the other mummies that we've excavated. So, all right, let's look at what happens to young Moses here.
Moses' understanding was far beyond his years. His instructors observed that he disclosed keener comprehension than is usual at his age. All his actions in his infancy promised greater ones after he should come to man's estate. And when he was but 3 years old, God granted him remarkable size. As for his beauty, it was so attractive that frequently those meeting him as he was carried along on the road were obliged to turn and stare at him. They would leave what they were about and stand still a great while looking after him, for the loveliness of the child was so wondrous that it held the gaze of the spectator. The daughter of Pharaoh, perceiving Moses to be an extraordinary lad, adopted him as her son, for she had no child of her own. She informed her father of her intention concerning him in these words: I have brought up a child who is divine in form and of excellent mind, and as I received him through the bounty of the river in a wonderful way, I have thought it proper to adopt him as my son and as heir of your kingdom. And when she had spoken thus, she put the infant between her father's hands, and he took him and hugged him close to his breast.
So in that midrash, it seems like Pharaoh digs this boy too, and in this midrash, she tells her father, in this case, that she found him, and in the Nile, but it's okay. He accepts him. In the movies that we see, normally the depiction of Moses, there's almost universally the depiction of Moses as an inner court favorite is there. In that, in the DeMille version, I mean, you've got Charlton Heston, who has a great bearing and handsome person, and then you have Ramses, his rival, who, while a compelling character, Yul Brynner has a kind of a villainous look to him. He made a career of that, of kind of being the guy, even if he's the hero, you're wondering, what's he really, I mean, look at the Magnificent Seven. I mean, he's the hero of that, and he's still kind of an anti-hero in that he's kind of scary. This is based on the Midrash. It's based on the idea of Moses as part of the inner circle, and that he fit in well with the inner circle in the sense that he looks the part, and he's magnetic. He has a magnetic personality. The problem, of course, is that you can't make him too Egyptian. You can't make him too far over onto that side, because then he becomes problematic as a Jew. If he becomes too Egyptian. The movies have always pushed the envelope of that. They've always liked the idea, and you're going to see the basis for that in the Midrash. But we really don't know that Moses ever doesn't know who he is. We really don't know that. We assume that. We've seen the movies where he doesn't know. We really don't know that. The only movie version that I've ever seen, and it wasn't popular, so you may not have seen it, but the only movie version that sets up the possibility that Moses always knows he's adopted, always knows that he's a Hebrew, always knows that he's on the outside, and is not a magnetic and beautiful and articulate person, which he says he's not, because Moses at the burning bush says he's not, is a Ben Kingsley version that came out a few years back. And Ben Kingsley is obviously an articulate person. Some people would say he's magnetic, but he's definitely ethnic. We're never really sure what ethnicity Ben Kingsley is, right? The guy's played Gandhi. He's played all these characters where you're not sure, is he Italian? Is he Indian? Is he like something Jewish? I mean, he played he played some amazing Jewish roles, including Schindler's List. But you don't really know what he is. He's just not English, or he's not whatever. He's not what he's a minority, right? He's not in Germany, in Poland, he's a Jew, so he's not of that majority ethnicity, I guess, except in Gandhi. but he plays the role as the outsider. Usually it's Moses is the ultimate insider, but he's not really. And the reveal is that he's really not. The Prince of Egypt did that better than almost everything, where Moses is better, and DeMille did it too, but Moses is better than everybody in everything Egyptian. He can speak like, he knows the gods, he knows how to build pyramids, he does all these great Egyptian things, but he's not, the joke is that he doesn't know that he's not Egyptian. And so he's the ultimate Egyptian who really turns out not to be an Egyptian, which is like a fascination that we have, that Jews have played out a whole lot, which is, you think that they're, you think they're the ultimate WASP, right? And then it turns out, you missed it. The guy, and sometimes the guy doesn't know, right? Sometimes the person or the woman doesn't. I mean, heck, we just heard we're going to get a new Jewish Secretary of State. The last Jewish Secretary of State, Madeleine Albright, found out she was Jewish when she was 59. Talk about the ultimate reveal. I mean, it's her story. Said that she didn't know she was a Jew until she was 59. So does this happen? Of course it happens. It happens where the person knows and doesn't tell anybody. And it also happens that the person seems to really not know that they were Jewish. So it's a theme that we've seen played out a lot. And we're going to see why Moses maybe doesn't know. Well, first of all, he's a little baby, right? So when he it is possible he didn't know. But this whole idea that he has a destiny that he's called to that he doesn't know about, pretty wild. All right, so let's see what happens.
Moses rescued by Gabriel. When Moses was in his 3rd year, Pharaoh was dining one day with the queen Al-Faranit at his right hand, his daughter Bithiah with the infant Moses upon her lap at his left, and Balaam, the son of Beor, together with his 2 sons, and all the princes of the realm, sitting at table in the king's presence. It happened that the infant took the crown from off the king's head and placed it on his own. When the king and the princes saw this, they were terrified, and each one in turn expressed his astonishment. The king said to the princes, "What speak you and what say you, O you princes, on this matter? And what is to be done to this Hebrew boy on account of this act?"
Okay, so let's talk about this midrash. This is a very famous, well-worn midrash, which is that the Pharaoh is wearing a crown. Baby Moses takes the crown, puts it on his head, which of course is the prophecy that there's going to be a Hebrew baby that's born that's going to take away your power. So, whoa, this just happened. It just happened at 3 that he actually does this. Again, nowhere in the Torah does this happen, but it's so well known that people think it's in the Torah. There's different versions of it. There's there's variations, but this idea that Moses somehow telegraphs his attention as a baby, because he doesn't know any better, but he really does, right? It's God kind of signaling what's going to happen. The key part of this is that Pharaoh knows who he is. Pharaoh knows he's a Hebrew child. So in this midrash, it's well known that he is. It's not a secret. Keep that in mind. But what you're about to read right now is a 2,000-year-old rehashing of anti-Semitism that goes back 2,000 years. And I promise you, as you read this, you're going to say, oh my gosh, things have not changed in 2,000 years. And what's so interesting about this is that the rabbis wrote this because of what was already Jewish anti-Semitism which Jews had to deal with, but they based it on the Torah itself. So what they're basically saying is that even if you take the Torah at face value, watch what happens. And again, it's still an issue. Anybody who reads the Bible could derive this out of the Bible. And so it's almost like they're saying, we know what you say. We hear all these anti-Semitic canards. Read this and understand that things have not changed in 2,000 years. All right. So here's Balaam, and we already know Balaam's a bad guy, and he goes back, according to the Midrash, lots of Midrash, he's a bad guy back in Egypt. He's a counselor to Pharaoh, and his animosity and his anti-Semitism is known back then. So here's what happens.
Balaam spoke, saying, "Remember now, O my Lord and King, the dream which you dreamed many days ago, and how your servant interpreted it to you. Now this is the child of the Hebrews, in whom is the Spirit of God. Let not my Lord the King imagine in his heart that being a child, he did the thing without knowledge. For he is a Hebrew boy, and wisdom and understanding are with him, although he is yet a child. And with wisdom has he done this, and chosen to himself the kingdom of Egypt. For this is the manner of all the Hebrews, to deceive kings and their magnates, to do all things cunningly in order to make the kings of the earth and their men stumble."
Right. This is the ultimate Soros, the original Soros, if you will.
Mm-hmm. "Surely you know that Abraham their father acted thus, who made the armies of Nimrod, king of Babel, and of Abimelech, king of Gerar, to stumble, and he possessed himself of the land of the children of Heth and the whole realm of Canaan. Their father Abraham went down into Egypt and said of Sarah, his wife, 'She is my sister,' in order to make Egypt and its king to stumble."
So some of that is in the Torah, right? The story of Abraham and Avimelech, and Abraham and again, we talked about how it says he's a Philistine in the Bible, but even by this time they're saying they're Canaanites, children of Heth. But it doesn't matter. I mean, I don't want to get hung up on that. The point is that, and the Nimrod story is in the Midrash. It's not in the Torah. But the rabbis, the people who wrote this Midrash, say people would look at those stories and say Abraham deceives all these kings. All these leaders are deceived by Abraham. Now the Bible tells most of these stories. Obviously, it doesn't say that we deceive these people, other than Abraham had to tell Avimelech and Pharaoh that Sarah was his wife so they wouldn't kill him. But here, the spin, and the rabbis spun it. It wasn't like, you don't have to say this. They said it probably because other people said it. Because other people said, "Oh, look at their own Bible. Their own Bible says that they're liars and cheats. Their own Bible, let's point to it." People were doing it. People were doing it 2,000 years ago. Before they were Christian, before they were Muslim, before their texts were based on our Bible, they were doing it. So there's Abraham. He's a liar and cheat. 3 examples.
"His son Isaac did likewise when he went to Gerar, and he dwelt there, and his strength prevailed over the army of Abimelech, and he intended to make the kingdom of the Philistines to stumble by saying that Rebekah, his wife, was his sister."
And we just read that portion last week. And so that portion is the portion where Isaac does the same thing with his wife, Rebekah. Has to say that she's his sister so that he can stay alive, and so that this Avimelech, or maybe the same Avimelech is a title rather than a name, but the king of the Philistines, or the king of Gerar, doesn't kill him. So he did it too. All right, there's a story of trickery. And guess what? The most famous trickster we also just read about last week.
"Jacob also dealt treacherously with his brother, and took his birthright and his blessing from him. Then he went to Padan Aram, to Laban, his mother's brother, and he obtained his daughters from him cunningly, and also his cattle and all his belongings. And he fled away and returned to the land of Canaan to his father.
And this is what we're going to be reading about in the next couple of weeks. The story of Jacob, who, of course, one can make the argument, the Torah quite frankly says that his father-in-law tricked him, but he also tricks his father-in-law, and he also tricked, of course, his brother. Without a question, he tricks Esau, and tricks his father, Isaac. So look at these guys. They're the ultimate Jew. You cannot trust Jews. And where did they get it from? The Bible itself. So the rabbis drew on the Bible, maybe because, again, other people already did it. And here's the last story of Jews behaving badly. Well, this one, they definitely behaved badly.
His sons sold their brother Joseph, and he went down into Egypt and became a slave. And he was put into prison for 12 years until the former Pharaoh delivered him from the prison and magnified him above all the princes of Egypt on account of his interpreting the king's dreams. When God caused a famine to descend upon the whole world, Joseph sent for his father, and he brought him down into Egypt, his father, his brethren, and all his father's household, and he supplied them with food without pay or reward, while he acquired Egypt and made slaves of all its inhabitants.
This is the ultimate Jewish, this is literally, you hear this every single generation ever since, which is that the Jews have tricked us, have taken our money. They now own all means of production and means of, of wealth that the Jews have taken over. And this is what Balaam tells the Pharaoh. These people cannot be trusted. They are always trying to get more. They're always trying to take advantage. They're always trying to take power. I mean, there is literally nothing in here that is out of place in today's modern anti-Semitic rantings. There's nothing different there. It literally could have been written last week. So that's how we wound up owing the Jews all this money, was because of Joseph, because Joseph ended up making slaves out of all the Egyptians, which is kind of there in the text. It doesn't say he made them slaves, but it says that, that he ended up buying back all their property, taking all their property on credit for the food that he was giving them. But I mean, literally, he didn't do that. He did that for Pharaoh. Here, it's not he did it for Pharaoh. He did it for himself, that Joseph did it for himself. So this is the rabbis probably repeating what other people said, using the Bible against us. And it still happens. It still happens. This is the ultimate kind of Jewish boogeyman that they're now saying Moses is one of those people. He's one of those people, and he's going to do the same thing to us that the Jewish people have done to every other person, every other king, every other opportunity they've had. And this is before there's any of them. We're only in Egypt, folks. There's only one family. We've multiplied by this point, but it's not like he's basing this on anything other than all those stories go back to 70 Jews. Now, again, there's thousands, millions of Jews living in Egypt. But all those stories that Balaam just quoted are just from the book of Genesis. That's one Jewish family. 4 generations of Jews did this. I mean, unbelievable. And the amazing thing is the rabbis repeated it. The rabbis showed you what already existed as far as anti-Semitism 2,000 years ago. That's 2,000 years old. All right. By the way, that part isn't well known. The first part that we read about with Moses taking the crown and the part that we're about to read is so well known that people think it's in the Bible. It's one of those midrash that people love, that people think is in the Torah, but it's not. It's just so well known that people think it's biblical. All right.
Now, therefore, my Lord King, behold, this child has risen up in their stead in Egypt to do according to their deeds and make sport of every man, be he king, prince, or judge. If it please the king, let us now spill his blood upon the ground, lest he grow up and snatch the government from your hand, and the hope of Egypt be cut off after he reigns. Let us, moreover, call for all the judges and the wise men of Egypt, that we may know whether the judgment of death be due to this child, as I have said, and then we will slay him.
All right, so here's the setup. We're gonna have to kill this baby, 3-year-old baby. Now here's the scene. So this is the part, as I'm saying, this is the part that people know. This is the setup, though, you probably maybe weren't as familiar with. So here's the story of baby Moses.
Pharaoh sent and called for all the wise men of Egypt, and they came. And the angel Gabriel was disguised as one of them. When they were asked their opinion in the matter, Gabriel spoke up and said, "If it please the king, let him place an onyx stone before the child and a coal of fire. And if he stretches out his hands and grasps the onyx stone, then we shall know that the child has done with wisdom all that he has done, and we will slay him. But if he stretches out his hand and grasps the coal of fire, then we shall know that it was not with consciousness that he did the thing, and he shall live."
Do you recognize this midrash, folks?
Yes. The counsel seemed good in the eyes of the king, and when they had placed the stone and the coal before the child, Moses stretched forth his hand toward the onyx stone and attempted to seize it. But the angel Gabriel guided his hand away from it and placed it upon the live coal. And the coal burnt the child's hand, and he lifted it up and touched it to his mouth, and burnt part of his lips and part of his tongue. And for all his life he became slow of speech and of a slow tongue.
So this very famous midrash is an explanation for how Moses, well, the net effect, well, the midrash does, as midrash always does, teaches us a couple of things. The first is that Moses still aroused suspicion in the land of Egypt, right? That people were not 100% sure that this was going to work out, having this baby in our midst. So that's part of the drama here, and that he was going to be killed. So sometimes it's gold, sometimes it's a bag of whatever, precious stones, and then the coal. But the midrash is for one reason and one reason only. Really, the real reason for this story is to explain, how did Moses wind up with a speech impediment? How did Moses wind up this beautiful baby, right? That was, seems like, God made it perfect, but how did it wind up with a speech impediment? And that's why this midrash is here. This midrash is to explain how Moses got his speech impediment. He was not born with it. He essentially had to have it in order to live. So this is a wonderful midrash that it essentially kind of answers the question, how does a perfect child, like they're saying he's a perfect baby, right? Can't take your eyes off, but yet he has. Now, of course, if we wrote the midrash today, we'd say just because a baby is beautiful and looks pretty doesn't mean that it has everything. It doesn't work like that in the ancient world. In the ancient world, this baby should have been perfect in every way. But the Torah says that he's not. And so this is an explanation for how it happened. It was either that or he was going to die. So it's the perfect setup for why Moses talks the way he does. He burned his tongue as an infant, and that's why he talks like that. So it saved his life. That incident saved his life.
There was an experiment some years ago called Pygmalion in the Classroom, where, it was a two-part thing, but children who were very attractive did better in school because they were favored by their teachers. Yeah. So there is something to that myth that if you're not attractive, you don't do as well in the world.
Yeah, and you wonder how that happens. part of it is, you know, the human distraction, or kind of, you know, it is strange, but I think that there must have been there's some kind of genetic predisposition we have for creating, you know, people who are attractive, or something like that. So how we decide that, I don't know
It's
how
like the peacock's tail, probably.
Yeah.
The peacock's tail becomes a marker for how healthy the peacock is. And even though the tail doesn't do the peacock any good at all, it serves to indicate to the peahens that this is a healthy bird.
Yeah, look, there's something there. I mean, because, I mean, you just look, there's a reason why we have people like, I mean, it's just ridiculous. I mean, just because I saw it last night, why is there a Tom Brady? I mean, that shouldn't happen, right? You know, there shouldn't be somebody who's that talented, that healthy, that wealthy, that smart. You know, the guy does everything. I mean, like literally does everything. And it just, I mean, he takes good care of himself, but you look at it and you go, it shouldn't happen. Like it doesn't rationally happen unless there's like centuries that you're fighting against centuries of millennia of breeding. But it's just weird. I mean, it really doesn't make sense. But other than it's been going on for thousands of years. Moses, the idea that Moses is charismatic and is beautiful and everything else, but yet, even if he has all that, he can't speak well. He has a speech impediment, that something is happening, that the words don't come out right. The rabbis had to say, he wasn't born that way. Well, it seems like he was born that way, actually, because God actually says to him, I made you like that. Now, you can make the argument, because Gabriel comes down and does it, that God did in fact make him that way, because Gabriel did what God wanted him to do. But God basically says it to him at the burning bush, when Moses says, I can't speak, I'm not a good speaker, don't have me do this. God says, you don't think I made you? And it's a great line that God says to him, I made you, I know what you can do. And so there is that, you know, beautiful line, which I don't know that this undermines it, but it gives it a different reading that's not nearly as powerful as the text itself, which is how ironic that the best leader that we had in Judaism, in Jewish history, one of the great leaders of all time, according to what we know, had a speech impediment. You know, nobody likes to display that. Nobody likes to see that on film. Nobody likes to see that live action or animated. But that's what the Torah says. We can't handle it.
St. Paul also, scripture says, Christian scripture says, St. Paul had a speech impediment.
Yeah. I don't know what to make of this other than in the ancient world. I think that, first of all, I think it must have been, I don't know, that I can't say it must have been true, but the Bible had no issue with it. And by the way, the Bible has no issue telling us, folks, that during the last good 40 years of his life, Moses couldn't even be seen by the people because he had a veil on, because he was disfigured or transfigured or transformed or burned up by seeing God on Mount Sinai. So for the next 38 and a half years, Moses, no one saw his face. So you have a guy who can't speak, who can't even be seen, being the leader of the Jewish people. That's what the Torah says, folks. That's not what I said. That's not what the Midrash says. That's what the Torah says happened to Moses. So the irony, pretty deep, pretty steep, that there's a leader of the Jewish people who's leading them at the most crucial time in their lives, can't speak and can't be seen.
Somehow I've always thought that what happened maybe way back when was that if you go by the idea that the Torah was a synthesis of things, that there were all these stories attributed to Aaron as well as to Moses, and in order to make sense of that, they said that Moses couldn't speak and couldn't be seen. So that Aaron that's why all these stories were about Aaron originally.
Could be. It could be. There's definitely that possibility that Aaronite, the Kohanim, who were the descendants of Aaron, wanted to explain how Aaron got that power. There's definitely that possibility. But you know, the interesting thing that we have in our world, though, is that we need it. Well, and the rabbis needed it too. They needed an answer for how Moses got to be like this. Mm-hmm. They couldn't simply say, "Yeah, this is people saying why Aaron is going to have such an important role that he has." Which, again, the movies never like to have Aaron. I mean, even when they have Aaron, they had in the Ten Commandments. You know, it was Carradine, and then the senior Carradine, and then John Carradine, and then in the Prince of Egypt, the movie, it's Jeff Goldblum does the voice of Aaron. I mean, their roles are always kind of like minimal because focus is always on Moses. And what does Moses say? What does Moses look like? And we always have this beautiful image of Moses, which again, the Midrash basically wants us to have. They want us to think that Moses was charismatic and beautiful, but I don't know that the Torah itself paints that picture. And you're right, Rosemary. Maybe that was the agenda of the priestly authors. But again, the bigger issue is it's kind of shrouded in mystery. Moses is shrouded in mystery. So what do we do? What do we do with this young Moses? How do we educate and keep this guy on the straight and narrow if he's going to be raised in Egypt? And that's what we get to now. Again, nothing in the Torah about how Moses was educated or how he grew up. He's simply being nursed, and then the next thing you know, he's going out and sees an Egyptian beating a Hebrew. That's it. But here's the in between. I'm telling you, there's nothing else. We saw it. There's nothing else.
At great cost, teachers were invited to come to Egypt.
No. Oh. It's seeing that.
Sorry. Seeing this, the king and the princes knew that Moses had not acted with knowledge in taking the crown from off the king's head, and they refrained from slaying him. God himself, who protected Moses, turned the king's mind to grace, and his foster mother snatched him away, and she had him educated with great care, so that the Hebrews depended upon him and cherished the hope that great things would be done by him. But the Egyptians were suspicious of what would follow from such an education as his.
Where were you going to educate young Moses? Of course, you know, is he going to be educated at liberal institutions on the East Coast, or is he going to go overseas for his education? How are we going to educate young Moses? And here's what we get. I'm not kidding. You think I've overstated? This was written thousands of years ago. It shows you that even back then, people thought about where are you educated?
At great cost, teachers were invited to come to Egypt from neighboring lands to educate the child Moses. Some came of their own accord to instruct him in the sciences and the liberal arts. By reason of his admirable endowments of mind, he soon excelled his teachers in knowledge. His learning seemed a process of mere recollecting, and when there was a difference of opinion among scholars, he selected the correct one instinctively, for his mind refused to store up anything that was false. But he deserves more praise for his unusual strength of will than for his natural capacity, for he succeeded in transforming an originally evil disposition into a noble, exalted character, a change that was farther aided by his resolution, as he himself acknowledged later. After the wonderful exodus of the Israelites from Egypt, a king of Arabia sent an artist to Moses to paint his portrait, that he might always have the likeness of the divine man before him. The painter returned with his handiwork, and the king assembled his wise men, those in particular who were conversant with the science of physiognomy. He displayed the portrait before them and invited their judgment upon it. The unanimous opinion was that it represented a man covetous, haughty, sensual, in short, disfigured by all possible ugly traits. The king was indignant that they should pretend to be masters in physiognomy, seeing that they declared the picture of Moses, the holy divine man, to be the picture of a villain. They defended themselves by accusing the painter, in turn, of not having produced a true portrait of Moses, else they would not have fallen into the erroneous judgment they had expressed. But the artist insisted that his work resembled the original closely.
So again, this whole story, we're not done yet, is about what Moses looked like. And this idea that somebody painted a picture of Moses, specifically an Arabian, a ruler from the Middle East, let's say an Arabian king. So let's read it.
Unable to decide who was right, the Arabian king went to see Moses, and he could not but admit that the portrait painted for him was a masterpiece. Moses, as he beheld him in the flesh, was Moses upon the canvas. There could be no doubt but that the highly extolled knowledge of his physiognomy experts was empty twaddle. He told Moses what had happened and what he thought of it. He replied, your artist and your expert alike are masters, each in his line. If my fine qualities were a product of nature, I would be no better than a log of wood, which remains forever as nature produced it at the first. Unashamed, I make the confession to you that by nature I possessed all the reprehensible traits your wise men read in my picture and ascribed to me, perhaps to a greater degree even than they think. But I mastered my evil impulses with my strong will, and the character I acquired through severe discipline has become the opposite of the disposition with which I was born. Through this change, wrought in me by my own efforts, I have earned honor and commendation upon earth as well as in heaven.
So let's talk about that for a second. This weird midrash about what Moses looked like. Again, this is not every version of it, but we have a version here of Moses's what Moses looked like that's not favorable at all. So here you have a midrash that I don't know what you want to say about this other than it kind of says that Moses looked like a bad guy, that Moses looked like a bad guy. And that if you looked at him, if you looked at Moses, you'd look at him and say, oh, that's not a guy to be trusted. I mean, what's really going on here is that they're basically saying that this is the ugly, these are Jews already, they're already kind of feeding into this, this idea that there's a Jewish scary look and that he has that, that this is the, that this is the ultimate Jewish kind of like scary, scary guy, right? It's the, here, I'll show you, since we have the power to, to show you. I mean, here's the ultimate, Nazi, look of what a scary Jew looks like, that the Jews were buying into their own, we're buying into that. We're buying into this view that the ultimate in beauty would be a Greco-Roman statue, and that this image of what we look like is not to be trusted, is scary, is covetous, all those horrible adjectives attached to Moses, right? And so they buy into it. So they buy into those, and they even admit, okay, so that looks bad. He looked bad. He looked like a bad guy. But they're saying that Moses said, that may be what I look like. That may be even what I would have been like. But I took control of my impulses, that I didn't allow myself to become greedy and covetous and lecherous and all those kinds of things, which again, the implication is that you can look at somebody and know that they're going to be bad. And Moses says, okay, fine. I looked like that. I could have been like that, but I wasn't. And so as much as, you know, Moses is given credit for being so wise and being so smart and knowing everything, maybe the possibility that Moses's greatest quality wasn't his intelligence, but his ability to control his own behavior and to kind of be the best version of himself that he could be, that literally he might have been a bad, I mean, like he might have been not the good person, but that's what his greatest quality was, is that he turned it on its head. He didn't allow that to happen. And so that's his character. That's his strength, his inner strength. And so of course the rabbis are saying that's what really makes us the best. That's what God essentially would want. I mean, how can you be more like Moses? Conquer your own weaknesses, conquer your own inner demons. And then it's not about being smart. It's not about having natural gifts. On the contrary, it may be that you don't have the natural gifts, but if you work on it, then you could be. It's wild. But of course it implies that the Jewish people at the time that they wrote this midrash had been indoctrinated, had bought into their own negative stereotypes.
And they weren't willing, the rabbis weren't willing to go along with the idea that maybe this is just nonsense. And it was alive, like, it reminds me of the Three Musketeers, because D'Artagnan is supposed to be an expert in physiognomy. And then, of course, that's never questioned, except that you have the character of Milady, who looks completely angelic and isn't.
Right. So I think when we consider how old this midrash is, mm-hmm. It's almost, I mean, it literally is astounding that for thousands of years, Jews have heard this, and in some cases bought into it, and then given their own spin on it, right? How are we going to and again, Jews aren't the only minority group that this happened to. It happens to lots of minority groups in our own country right now, you know, but that we've been dealing with it for 2,000 years. It's astounding. I mean, when I really think about it, it's astounding. So it's obviously a product of interaction between, if the Jewish community is completely cut off from the rest of the, you know, if it's completely autonomous and not dealing with the rest of the Gentile world, it's really, you don't get that. But at times during the Greco-Roman period, at times and during the German, during the post-Enlightenment, what we call the Emancipation period, where Jews started dealing with Europeans and comparing and contrasting themselves to the Europeans that they knew. How do you respond to that? It's astounding that it's been going on for 2,000 years. And so they bought into it, but then they gave their explanation, which is that Moses accepted it or didn't accept it. Moses admits it and then tells you, but I didn't live that way. All right. Again, that's not the common midrash, but there is that midrash, which I think is astounding. Again, 2,000 years old. All right. So we're going to read a little bit about what Moses does. We're going to not get all the way to, it's going to take a few weeks or a couple times before we get to Moses leading the people. We're still kind of explaining how he got to that, which the Torah doesn't tell us, but the Midrash does. All right.
The youth of Moses. One day, it was after he was grown up and had passed beyond the years of childhood, Moses went to the land of Goshen, in which lived the children of Israel. There he saw the burdens under which his people were groaning, and he inquired why the heavy service had been put upon them. The Israelites told him all that had befallen, told him of the cruel edict Pharaoh had issued shortly before his birth. And the screen just went funny.
Sorry, I'm gonna go.
And told him of the wicked counsels given by Balaam against themselves, as well as against his person, when he was but a little boy, and had set Pharaoh's crown upon his head. The wrath of Moses was kindled against the spiteful advisor, and he tried to think out means of rendering him harmless. But Balaam, getting wind of his ill feeling, fled from Egypt with his 2 sons, and betook himself to the court of Kikanos, king of Ethiopia. The sight of his
wait, hold it a second. Let's just explain what happens there. This is Moses turning on Balaam. So this is a backstory that Moses and Balaam have a history. And this is based on these myths of Balaam and his family, that they started out in Egypt, and then things are going really well for them. They're Pharaoh's advisors, and then things get bad. things go bad for them, and they have got to get out. And so where do they go to? They go to Ethiopia. They go farther south. These are part of kind of like a set of myths or legends about magicians known as Janus and Jambres, which was in a book of the Apocrypha, so the early church knew about it. And according to tradition, these are the magicians that come back and are the ones that Moses has to deal with when they are when he's at the court of Pharaoh. So these are Balaam's sons have their own legends, have their own stories. And there's like a little backstory about them. Here's a little bit of like who they were. And that's what this purpose of this midrash is to kind of give us what Balaam's backstory is and where these magicians who are Pharaoh's advisors, where they came from. That they're actually Balaam's sons. Trying to think where you would know. Oh yeah, in The Prince of Egypt, the 2 characters are played by Steve Martin and Martin Short. They play the Egyptian magicians as kind of very clever and deceitful, and they're very talented too. But they're the magicians who advise the Pharaoh. So they have a legendary backstory too, the magicians, and they're powerful, right? Their father is Balaam, and they're steeped in magic. So here we go. Here's Moses. Moses is starting to come to terms with who he is, if you will. Here we go.
The sight of his enslaved people touched Moses to tears, and he spoke, saying, "Woe unto me for your anguish. Rather would I die than see you suffer so grievously." He did not disdain to help his unfortunate brethren at their heavy tasks, as much as lay in his power. He dismissed all thought of his high station at court, shouldered a share of the burdens put upon the Israelites, and toiled in their place. The result was that he not only gave relief to the heavily laden workmen, but he also gained the favor of Pharaoh, who believed that Moses was taking part in the labor in order to promote the execution of the royal order. And God said to Moses, "You did relinquish all your other occupations and joined yourself to the children of Israel, whom you treat as brethren. Therefore, I too put aside now all heavenly and earthly affairs and hold converse with you."
Wow. So Moses, because he could have been could have been a contender. He could have been the head of Egypt. Was he's because he's dedicated himself to the Jewish people, God says, I'm going to dedicate myself to you. So Moses, this is all before Moses does what the Torah tells us he does, which is physically come to the relief, to the rescue of an Israelite, to a Hebrew. This is the other stuff that kind of he does before that.
Moses continued to do all he could to alleviate the suffering of his brothers to the best of his ability. He addressed encouraging words to them, saying, "My dear brothers, bear your lot with fortitude. Do not lose courage, and let not your spirit grow weary with the weariness of your body. Better times will come when tribulation shall be changed into joy. Clouds are followed by sunshine, storms by calm. All things in the world tend toward their opposites, and nothing is more inconstant than the fortunes of man."
Right. Interesting, right? This is a little, I mean, it's not critical for the movement of our story, but of course, it reminds us not to give up, right? That clouds are followed by sunshine. It's not always going to be bad. And so Moses starts encouraging his people by telling them good times are around the corner, which is definitely a message that we need to, when we're down, to know that it's not going to stay like that forever. You don't want to hear that message when things are going good, but I guess it's important to remember that too. Things are not always going to be like that. But yeah, when we're down, it's nice to know that nothing is more inconstant than the fortunes of men. Nothing lasts forever. And especially when it's bad. All right, so let's get to this.
The royal favor which the king accorded him in ever increasing measure, he made use of to lighten the burden laid upon the children of Israel. One day he came into the presence of Pharaoh and said, "O my lord, I have a request to make of you, and my hope is that you will not deny it." "Speak," replied the king. "It is an admitted fact," said Moses, "that if a slave is not accorded rest at least one day in the week, he will die of overexertion. Hebrew slaves will surely perish unless you accord them a day of cessation from work." Pharaoh fulfilled the petition preferred by Moses, and the king's edict was published in the whole of Egypt and in Goshen as follows: "To the sons of Israel, thus says the king, do your work and perform your service for 6 days, but on the 7th day you shall rest. On it you shall do no labor. Thus shall you do unto all times, according to the command of," sorry, I can't read. "According to the command of the king and the command of Moses, the son of Bithiah." And the day appointed by Moses as the day of rest was Saturday, later given by God to the Israelites as the Sabbath day.
So, which came first? The 10 Commandments, with the law to keep the 7th day. And of course, it says it right at the beginning of creation that God rested on the 7th day. But here we have an interesting possibility that Moses created the Sabbath. That the Shabbat came before, to some extent, God said that there was going to be a Shabbat. That Moses helped the people by giving them Shabbat. That's a weird midrash, not one that you necessarily expect to see, which is that Moses invented Shabbos before there is a Shabbos. That we say on the Sabbath that we remember the Exodus from Egypt. That's part of what we say. And so the rabbis kind of tied that to the fact that we got the Sabbath in Egypt. it's an interesting kind of like pre-explanation for why we have the Sabbath. We have it a few times. Obviously, the Torah mentions Shabbat a few times, but here's a midrash that Moses actually gives Shabbat to the people. So I wouldn't say it's well-known midrash, but there are people who know it. It's not a suppressed midrash, that's for sure. So now some more backstory of things that we hear about in the Torah. Here we go.
While Moses abode in Goshen, an incident of great importance occurred. To superintend the service of the children of Israel, an officer from among them was set over every 10, and 10 such officers were under the surveillance of an Egyptian taskmaster. One of these Hebrew officers, Datan by name, had a wife, Shalomit, the daughter of Divri of the tribe of Dan, who was of extraordinary beauty, but inclined to be very loquacious. Whenever the Egyptian taskmaster set over her husband came to their house on business connected with his office, she would approach him pleasantly and enter into conversation with him. The beautiful Israelitish woman enkindled a mad passion in his breast, and he sought and found a cunning way of satisfying his lustful desire. One day he appeared at break of dawn at the house of Datan, roused him from his sleep, and ordered him to hurry his detachment of men to their work. The husband scarcely out of sight, he executed the villainy he had planned and dishonored the woman, and the fruit of this illicit relation was the blasphemer of the name whom Moses ordered to execution on the march through the desert.
Yep. Now, the purpose of this midrash, is to explain how we wound up with a guy who gets killed in the Bible, who blasphemes God, right? So we read this story in Numbers of this guy who blasphemes God, says God's name in some bad way, and then he's executed, he's killed. So he violates one of the 10 commandments. So we don't know who this guy is. We hear he's the daughter of Shlomit, the daughter of Dibri from the tribe of Dan. That's all we know about him. But we also hear that he's only part Jewish. He's part Egyptian. So here's how he got born. Here's his birth story, which is that he's the product of he's product of a rape. But of course, we also have another person who's drawn into this, Datan, right? And we know later on that Datan and Abiram, again, to think about Datan as Edward G. Robinson, these are like Korach, these are the people who rebel against Moses, right? These are the leaders of the rebellion in Numbers. And so here we have a backstory that kind of explains why these people are messed up. Why are they the way they are? Well, first of all, they're kapos. They're Jews who beat and who were overseers of the Jews for the Egyptians. They worked as the taskmasters for the Egyptians. Horrible job, right? So this explains why Datan is the way he is. We don't have that in the Torah. But is it possible that tribal heads were put in charge of it's not beyond the realm of possibility that tribal leaders were doing the Egyptian work of overseeing the slaves, their own people. It's horrible. It's a horrible thing to do. And the rabbis are saying Datan was horrible back in Egypt. Shouldn't surprise you. He was a rebel. He always was jealous of Moses. He lost power. He had power back in Egypt. And this is in the movie, The 10 Commandments. That's one of the things that DeMille did is he based this whole background. And remember, he has the Korach rebellion in the movie. That's one of the things that happens after the 10 Commandments, why the movie doesn't end at the 10 Commandments, is he shows that Moses had to deal with these rebellions, and it wasn't easy for Moses. So they show the rebellion. They also show Datan when he's still in Egypt, Edward G. Robinson as a taskmaster, as a very mean guy, as a horrible plotter against Moses, collaborator. And of course, it is not without some tragic, I wouldn't say irony, but I wonder whether he was picked in. I wonder if Edward G. Robinson was picked for that role because he was one of the few Jews that's actually in the movie, The Ten Commandments. He's one of the only Jews in the Ten Commandments, and of course he's the bad guy. He's the bad Jew. Is Edward G. Robinson's role. So I always wondered about that, and of course, the backstory of what was going on at the time for Edward G. Robinson was that he was very involved in a horrible time in Hollywood, in the Hollywood blacklist, which put him in a horrible situation. And I've always found that to be an irony, that a tragic irony or coincidence, or maybe not coincidence, that he had that role with Datan in the movie when Edward G. Robinson, who was, by all accounts, a good person in Hollywood, one who was definitely on the left side of politics there, was put in a situation where he had to name people. It's a weird, like, when you consider what that was in the 50s and that movie was shot at that time, it's definitely not to be swept under the rug, so to speak, to think about Edward G. Robinson in that role. Datan is a creep from the very beginning, and that's in the movie. Just to remind you, he's the one whose slave girl is the girl that Joshua is in love with, and that she is treated, like garbage by Datan, and establishes his credentials as a bad guy. But here again, Datan is a victim here in this story. And as bad as he is, maybe there's I'm not making an excuse. I don't want to make an excuse for Datan, but here we have a reason why Datan might have been a little warped, which is his wife got raped. They had a kid. He had a kid who wasn't his kid, and this kid winds up not being a good person too. But it brings a lot of trauma together in a way that there's a little bit of blaming the victim, but it's just troubling. It's a troubling midrash, if you will, about who these taskmasters were. And the rabbis knew what they were talking about because they weren't writing out of a vacuum. They were dealing with collaboration. They were dealing with, how do we deal with the Romans, and how do we deal with people who are taking control of us, abusing us? Well, what do we do? How do we fight back? Some of our people are literally slaves to the Romans. How do we maintain our lives? Forget our political power. How do we stay alive? And so this is what is going on with the rabbis who write this. So keep that in mind as we're reading about these taskmasters, if you will. But there were Jewish equivalents for the Romans here, including people we call tax collectors, who also make appearances in the Christian Bible. Yep.
At the moment when the Egyptian slipped out of Shalomit's chamber, Datan returned home, vexed that his crime had come to the knowledge of the injured husband. The taskmaster goaded him on to work with excessive vigor and dealt him blow after blow with the intention to kill him. Young Moses happened to visit the place at which the much abused and tortured Hebrew was at work. Datan hastened toward him and complained of all the wrong and suffering the Egyptian had inflicted upon him. Full of wrath, Moses, whom the Holy Spirit had acquainted with the injury done the Hebrew officer by the Egyptian taskmaster, cried out to the latter, saying, "Not enough that you have dishonored this man's wife, you aim to kill him too?" And turning to God, he spoke further, "What will become of your promise to Abraham that his posterity shall be as numerous as the stars if his children are given over to death? And what will become of the revelation on Sinai if the children of Israel are exterminated?"
Wow. So he's asking God, what are you doing about this, God? How are your promises going to be kept? Yep.
Moses wanted to see if someone would step forward and, impelled by zeal for the cause of God and for God's law, would declare himself ready to avenge the outrage. He waited in vain. Then he determined to act himself. Naturally enough, he hesitated to take the life of a human being. He did not know whether the evildoer might not be brought to repentance and then lead a life of pious endeavor. He also considered that there would perhaps be some among the descendants to spring from the Egyptian, for whose sake their wicked ancestor might rightfully lay claim to clemency. The Holy Spirit allayed all his doubts. He was made to see that not the slightest hope existed that good would come either from the malefactor himself or from any of his offspring. Then Moses was willing to requite him for his evil deeds. Nevertheless, he first consulted the angels to hear what they had to say, and they agreed that the Egyptian deserved death, and Moses acted according to their opinion.
Right. So Moses, you know the story of him killing the Egyptian. Now here's the backstory. The backstory is
neither physical strength.
Well, wait a second. But wait, Moses can't just kill somebody without knowing, okay, the guy's bad. But what if one of his descendants is not bad? So he's got to get from God the go-ahead to kill this guy, because if he screws up what could have happened, it gives us an interesting idea that when we kill somebody, we take somebody's life, we're not just killing that person, we're killing anybody who could come from that person. So you got to be really careful when you kill somebody, because you're destroying the whole world. And when we think about what happens when we do that, you really you can't execute anybody, folks, because there's this idea that just because somebody's bad doesn't mean their descendants are going to be bad. So what do? You can't kill them. It's really problematic. Unless you're God, unless you're Moses, who talks to God and can get answers like this, you can't. So it's really, really hard to ever make the claim that you can kill somebody who might be bringing somebody into the world that the world needs. Something to think about when we have discussions about how do we deal with really bad people. The Torah is full of stories of people who have really do really bad things, but whose kids come out really good. And of course, vice versa. People who are really good whose kids don't do good things. So you never can be quite sure, which is another interesting lesson for us. Here we go.
Neither physical strength nor a weapon was needed to carry out his purpose. He merely pronounced the name of God, and the Egyptian was a corpse. To the bystanders, the Israelites, Moses said, "The Lord compared you to the sand of the seashore, and as the sand moves noiselessly from place to place, so I pray you to keep the knowledge of what has happened a secret within yourselves. Let nothing be heard concerning it."
Yeah, and of course we know that's not what happens. Moses tells the people not to say anything, or, well, let's put it this way. Moses doesn't say don't say anything, but Moses seems to be very cognizant of the fact that he doesn't want anybody to find out. The Torah seems pretty clear that Moses killed somebody. Let me just show you real quick. Chapter 2. All we get is sometime after that, Moses grown up, he went out to his kinsfolk and witnessed their labor. He saw an Egyptian being Hebrew, one of his kinsmen, which implies that, again, not imply, it states he knows who his people are. I mean, well, I guess you could say he didn't, but it's possible he didn't. That the Torah tells us that they're his people, but he didn't. I guess you could say that. But the Torah says he turned this way and that, and seeing no one about, he struck down the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. Now, the problem with this, of course, is that the rabbis didn't like the fact that Moses had blood on his hands. They didn't like it. Now, of course, that makes the story ever more complex and interesting, that Moses is a killer, actually killed people with his hand. The Midrash says he didn't have to touch him, didn't have to use anything on him, but all he had to do was say God's name, and the guy died. They don't want Moses to be fully responsible and to literally have blood on his hands. It could be a very crucial part of the story, by the way, because when we get to that very weird story in Exodus chapter 4, where Miriam has to spread a foreskin or blood or something on Moses, it could be because he killed somebody, and it's a ritual of cleansing someone who never paid the price for killing somebody. But the rabbis hate that one. They hate those 2 lines of Torah, 3 lines of Torah, so they don't even want to talk about it. But they definitely don't like the idea that Moses killed somebody with his bare hands, or even with a knife, or even with a tomahawk or anything else. They don't like it. But they also know that Moses's deed was found out. And it says, literally, I mean, this is the whole story. When he went out the next day, he found 2 Hebrews fighting. So he said to the offender, "Why do you strike your fellow?" And the guy retorted, "Who made you the chief and ruler over us? Do you mean to kill me as you killed the Egyptian?" Moses was frightened and thought, now the matter's known. So that's how Moses knows, by trying to do the right thing another time and stopping Israelites from hurting each other. Well, guess what? Those are the same bad people that we already heard about, and that we're going to hear about later. Here's what happens. Here's how they're identified.
The wish expressed by Moses was not honored. The slaying of the Egyptian remained no secret, and those who betrayed it were Israelites, Datan and Abiram, the sons of Palu of the tribe of Reuben, notorious for their effrontery and contentiousness. The day after the thing with the Egyptians happened, the 2 brothers began of malice aforethought to scuffle with each other, only in order to draw Moses into the quarrel. Oh, sorry about that.
Call from 244-0180.
Don't worry about it. Thank you.
I should have thought that was on mute. The day after the thing with the Egyptians happened, the 2 brothers began of malice aforethought to scuffle with each other, only in order to draw Moses into the quarrel and create an occasion for his betrayal. The plan succeeded admirably. Seeing Datan raise his hand against Abiram to deal him a blow, Moses exclaimed, "Oh, you are a villain to lift your hand against an Israelite, even if he is no better than you." Datan replied, "Young man, who made you to be a judge over us? You have not yet attained to years of maturity. We know very well that you are the son of Yocheved, though people call you the son of the princess Bithia. And if you should attempt to play the part of our master and judge, we will publish abroad the thing you did to the Egyptian. Or perhaps you harbor the intention to slay us as you slew him by pronouncing the name of God."
Right. So this Midrash says that Datan and Abiram set him up. They actually weren't really fighting. They just wanted to draw Moses out so that they could confront him and embarrass him and put him in his place. Basically saying, "We know who you are, Moses, and we also know what you did, and we'll tell people what you did." So again, these are really, really, really bad people. And they're bad back in Egypt. So we're going to finish up with this part right here, folks. this is how Moses wound up getting out of town. He's going to get out of town because his own people, I mean, the Torah tells us that. The Torah tells us that he had to go because of them. How would Moses have led the people out if he hadn't gone out to Midian and seen the burning bush, which he does in literally the next chapter of the Bible, by the way. That's it. The next chapter, he's at the burning bush. Who knows? But the point is that we sometimes forget the reason that Moses has to leave town is well, it's partly because he killed somebody, obviously, but also because the Jews ratted him out. His own people ratted him out. Doesn't look good. And so that's why the rabbis want to make sure these aren't just any group of people who rat him out. These are Jewish collaborators and bad folk, man. And we had bad folk in Egypt. And of course, the rabbis knew these. They had their own bad folk that were helping out the Romans. And there's a difference between doing what you need to do to stay alive and keeping your head down and paying your taxes. And then there's, you know what? I'm going to use my power with the Romans to take advantage of my own people. And there were definitely people who did that. There were people who, again, were tax collectors, were local Roman governors who did not do good things to their people, their own people. All right, took advantage. And there always are, folks. And ever you have a group that is subjected and is enslaved or treated like garbage, there's always a couple people who seem to float to the top who take advantage of the situation. And it's not just Jews, but it's a horrible thing to see when people are treated like garbage, that there are people who thrive in that sometimes. All right, here's those guys.
Not satisfied with these taunts, the noble pair of brothers took themselves to Pharaoh and spoke before him, "Moses dishonored your royal mantle and your crown." To which Pharaoh returned, saying, "Much good may it do him." But they pursued the subject. "He helps your enemies, Pharaoh," they continued. Whereupon he replied as before, "Much good may it do him." Still they went on, "He is not the son of your daughter." These last words did not fail of making an impression upon Pharaoh. A royal command was issued for the arrest of Moses, and he was condemned to death by the sword.
Wow. So what really gets Pharaoh is he's not your family. I mean, it's a great dramatic scene, by the way, but again, you saw it's not there, but it's a great dramatic scene. It gets better.
The angels came to God and said, "Moses, the familiar of your house, is held under restraint." And God replied, "I will espouse his cause." But the angels urged, "His verdict of death has been pronounced. Yes, they are leading him to execution." And again, God made reply as before, "I will espouse his cause."
Right. So he's about to get the lethal injection. Right? He's about to die. And the angels say, "You got to do something, God." And God says, "I'll take care of it. I'll take care of it." Here's how God takes it.
Moses mounted the scaffold, and a sword, sharp beyond compare, was set upon his neck 10 times, but it always slipped away because his neck was as hard as ivory. And still greater miracle came to pass. God sent down the angel Michael in the guise of a hangman, and the human hangman charged by Pharaoh with the execution was changed into the form of Moses. This spurious Moses the angel killed with the very sword with which the executioner had purposed to slay the intended victim. Meanwhile, Moses took to flight. Pharaoh ordered his pursuit, but it was in vain. The king's troops were partly stricken with blindness, partly with dumbness. The dumb could give no information about the abiding place of Moses. and the blind, though they knew where it was, could not get to it.
Wow. So the dramatic last minute escape from death. So seems like Moses just got out of town. Rabbis, they amped up the drama a little bit, the tension, made the scene a little bit better in their mind, which is that Moses is literally about to be executed and they can't kill him, you know. So it says the hangman, it's really the executioner, but you know, the guy who was in charge of this job, the guy clearly was not, it's not a nice thing to do to people, and so he gets killed instead. I mean, there's a poetic justice to this executioner being executed instead of Moses. And Moses is able to take flight. He's able to get out of town because the people who are chasing after him can't catch him. They can't find him. They can't, or if they can find him, they can't say where he is. And so he gets out. He gets out of town. And that's a perfect time for us to end, because while we're maybe not taking flight this week like we normally do for Thanksgiving, and we hope that everybody stays healthy and safe over this Thanksgiving and hopefully has a chance to give thanks for things. It's a little bit harder, of course, this year to think about all the things we have, but we do have a lot of things and a lot of things to be grateful for. So when we come back next week, we're going to read about Moses in exile, if you will, which he seems to be in for not a short period of time. Let's put it mildly. If Moses is 80 when he leads the people out of Egypt, because he lives to be 120 and they're in the wilderness for 40 years, he could have been out of Egypt for a long time, decades. So that's what we're going to get into in the coming weeks. We're going to get into Moses on the run, Moses in that time before he comes back to Egypt, in the wilderness, if you will. So again, I hope everybody is bound for good holiday experiences and has a chance to do some acts of thankfulness. And sometimes that's simply being thankful, and sometimes it's helping out others who aren't as fortunate as we are. So wherever you're going to be, and again, it is a hard time, holiday time, and not to be able to be with family. It's hard to believe that when we did this at Passover 9 months ago, that we'd still be doing it here for Thanksgiving, for our next big meal, usually with people. So wherever you're going to be grateful, and let's hope that this will be over soon, so that we can be with the people we love and care about, and even the people we don't love and care about.
And go Dodgers!
Be with our families, and go Dodgers! Yeah, where did that come from?
You know, it's 2020. You know, it's just.
You got a Dodgers hat on, that's why.
Okay, I mean, listen, that was pretty much the highlight of the year for many of them.
Yes, well, the highlight of my year was that I have a new grandchild. So
I know.
There you go.
There's a lot bigger things. But for something that we didn't really have to work on or do anything, I mean, let's face it, we couldn't even go to a game. There wasn't.
But it made time go faster, to be able to watch the games.
Yeah, it did, and it gave us a little something to not be stressed about, or to think about things that are out of our control that give us more anguish. That's for sure. So yeah. Anyways, everybody, feel grateful, and we're definitely grateful for the ability to study together and be with each other. So let's keep it that way by staying healthy and doing what we have to do to keep other people healthy too. Everybody, please.
We'll see you tomorrow.
Great to see you, and we'll see you tomorrow. And we got some good stuff coming up for Hanukkah too, folks. Before we know it, it'll be in Hanukkah time. We definitely have some good stuff there. Bye, everybody.
bye.
Stay good.